All right, how is everyone doing tonight? Welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel. We take a look at great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, and earth-shattering discoveries from obscure sources. And we are on our 198th day of doing what we call the Reciprocal Church, which is looking at spiritual sources, spiritual resources, things that you can use in your life to kind of syncretically, pragmatically create religious practice for yourself or spiritual practice for yourself, especially in lieu of the fact that our Western religions are collapsing under their own weight currently right now, especially as we start to recognize that they're fraudulent, that the New Testament is a psyop written by the Romans, and we're going to get into that more here today, and we're going to prove that in the next month, over the videos in the next month or 6 weeks or whatever. And the Old Testament isn't much better. It's mostly plagiarized and from Babylon and or Persia and or paganism and or mythology and or astrology. But the New Testament was written by the Romans, the Caesars, or the aristocracy, the court of the Caesars, primarily in the dynasty of the Flavians, 69 to 96 AD. We're looking way back at an old source here from 1979. The author that's kind of known for this theory is Joseph Atwill. His book Caesar's Messiah, which came out in 2005, and his book Shakespeare's Secret Messiah from maybe 2016 or so. And there's some other works. I'm excited about getting Michael Menescott's book, The Origins of Christianity, which is coming out, which just came out late last year. And hopefully that'll be in my hands within 24 hours. But I probably won't have time to go through it for a couple of videos. So we're going to look at this, which is called The True Authorship of the New Testament, which is written by Abelard Reuchlin, Reuchlin. It's just like a pamphlet that he wrote up in 1979, and he did a lot of digging to put this together, and it is a serious red pill. You can't, take it completely seriously as, just set in stone, but he gives you the sources to review them. And he really says that a lot of it's, you can piece it together from the letters that they wrote. So especially from Pliny the Elder, he wrote his natural history, but he also wrote a lot of correspondence with other Roman aristocrats and intellectuals, it's kind of like, I think Robert Eisenman sums it up pretty well. It's like a shell game. These Roman aristocrats, particularly the Piso family, along with the Caesars, they keep using different names. So they show up in places with all kinds of aliases and pseudonyms, but they use numerology and other techniques to kind of put their signature on it. So they say, if you know the code, you can kind of figure out who wrote what. But if you don't know the code, then you won't know any better. It just kind of seems a little bit weird, which obviously the Gospels seem weird in so many different places, and there's so much stuff in there that are the whole New Testament. That's just kind of non sequiturs, things that you don't need to know that are in there or that seem like an aside. And this is also true of Josephus's War of the Jews, which is the only first century work that actually corroborates the Gospels, says it corroborates Jesus' existence. And we find out here that Josephus was actually this guy Calpurnius Piso, Roman aristocrat, and he wrote Wars of the Jews, and then also his autobiography, and then also Antiquities of the Jews, the first like 20 years before the last, between 75 and 95 AD. And if you track these down, which we're going to do, which we have been doing, we'll see all the parallels between Josephus's works and the Gospels. They parody each other. They were clearly written together. Although that's not discussed too much in this particular work here. I think this is kind of, a proto expose of this. He was writing this pre-internet, and this is just like a pamphlet. There's parenthetical remarks written in pen, and it's typed up on a real typewriter and stuff like that. So this guy did a lot of digging, and he's definitely, I definitely have my hats off to him. But it's a serious red pill, because he doesn't just talk about the Gospels. He's saying that the Pisos wrote the Apocrypha, that the Pisos wrote the works of many of the classical scholars, such as Plutarch, Aristotle. Most of the works of Aristotle were written by this guy. Pliny. Pliny is one of the crowd. Both of them, Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger. Sounds like Pliny the Younger was also a pedophile and was exiled to an island for molesting a small boy at one point, but then he got out of his exile and came back to Rome to write good portions of the New Testament. He was an in-law of the Piso family. I believe Tacitus was also an in-law of the family, and so this is just an incestuous mess. And these guys took a sledgehammer to Western civilization, but it's on time release. So we haven't figured this out yet, but when we do, Western civilization will never be the same, because there's so much fraud going on that if he's right, which I think if you read Pliny, his letters, and you read some of the other classical sources, I'm intending to track all this stuff down. If Menescats hasn't done it, he's got this book that I haven't read yet that just came out. So I'm hoping that Menescats does the job and that I don't have to. But I will do it if it's necessary. If somebody needs to do it, I'll do it. Even though, I don't read Greek or Hebrew. I read a little Hebrew and a little Greek, but certainly I'd give it a try anyway. Sun Ra, the person I did write a book about, jazz musician, his thing was to find the true meaning of the Bible, and that's what he said. I found the truth. He said the Creator showed him how to read several ancient languages, and by doing so, I found out the truth. This was even before this. This is in the 50s and 60s. He said, I found out the truth, and the truth is a bad truth. And that is what we have here. This is You know, this is devastating if it's accurate. I'm surprised that this has not come across my desk before. But we're going to go back about half a paragraph and just, you know, set the stage a little bit and then see where this goes. And again, he's making a lot of statements. He's footnoting things. He's not necessarily explaining and citing evidence as much as he should, I don't think. But you can't really complain because this is a work of first impression, more or less. But anyway, then in 68 AD, Nero, the Emperor Nero, was assassinated by his own slave, Epaphroditus, who was a very interesting character also, who, unknown to his master, was young Piso's lackey. So Epaphroditus was, you know, in the Piso clan or gang, so to speak. And there, you know, it was Calpurnius Piso. His father, he said, wrote the book of Luke back around 60 AD. He explained earlier that he wrote it because he married into the Herod family. And the Herods were the puppet kings of Judea at this time. Herod the Great, but there's really like 20 of them. And, you know, it was like dynasty. They, you know, the procurator and the governor and the, you know, all these different leaders were all this different, you know, Herods. And these guys were into a lot of incest too. They kept marrying their cousins but anyway, the Pisos married into the Herod family, and that's one of the reasons why they wrote the Gospels, is to kind of, you know, to mellow out, to, you know, control the Jews by creating this peace, Prince of Peace, you know, this turn the other cheek person. And so one who believed that you needed to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and to, you know, turn the other cheek and be able to kind of accept oppression. The Romans wanted to oppress you, and they were offended if you fought back. So that's the main reason why they wrote it. But then they turned it into a whole family mission to propagate this. And, you know, they put themselves in many of these roles. And I would imagine that these roles were played out, you know, because nobody knew how to read. So they had to read these things out loud. And I think that they went all over the place, you know, to all kinds of, you know, whatever public places to read out the stories in the Gospels, but also in the rest of the epistles and some of the other later works. I succeeded in reading one sentence before going off. Let's try to stay on it now. Galba became emperor and named Piso's cousin, Lucianus Piso, as his intended successor. But Galba, in turn, was soon overthrown by Otho. Otho was then overthrown by Vitellius, at which point Piso and his friends began to flock together against the latter. The Pisos and Vespasian, the general, and Mucianus, his like sub-general or whatever, and Tiberius Alexander, who was a very wealthy Jew, and Philo's nephew, who lived in Alexandria, all joined ranks behind Vespasian to seek to overthrow Vitellius. This all happened in 68 and 69 AD. So that was the year of the four emperors: Nero, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. And then Vespasian took over. Okay, so he's the first of the Flavian dynasty, which means blonde or golden. And Arius Calpurnius Piso was still commanding the 7th Legion in Pannonia, Austria-Hungary, and Vespasian sent him, now appearing in Tacitus, with the name Marcus Antonius Primus. So this is now Piso, his name is now Primus, Marcus Antonius Primus. South across the Alps to overthrow Vitellius. Meanwhile, the main body of Vespasian's legions marched overland under Mucianus from the east toward Rome. Piso succeeded in defeating Vitellius's army and secured Rome for Vespasian. Mucianus arrived and promptly sent him to Judea to help Titus at the siege of Jerusalem. He did so, and in 70 AD, they assaulted the city, then the temple, burned it, slaughtered many thousands, sent thousands more to slavery and gladiatorial combat and death. So the Jews had their temple ransacked and looted. The money from the loot went to build the Roman Colosseum, which was done with Jewish slave labor, and the entertainment was the Jewish gladiators, combating on the stage until death. And then the Christians stole the whole story and said that it was the Christians versus the lions, when it was actually the Jews versus the lions. The Christians weren't even in existence at this point. They were people who maybe were proto-Christians, who eventually converted to Christianity, but they were Jews. And that's why they were persecuted, because they were Jews. The Romans were fighting Jews, not Christians. The Romans created the Christians, and the Christians are who they wanted to create because they were the past. They followed the Prince of Peace. They didn't believe in all this insurrection. Now, Christianity these days has a little bit of a harder edge to it. I don't know exactly where that came from. It doesn't come from much in the Bible except for maybe overturning the temple. But that's against the Jews, not against the Romans. So anyway. Then Arius Calpurnius Piso wrote in sequence the following: Gospel of Matthew, 70 to 75. Present Gospel of Mark. So he rewrote Mark, 75 to 80. And Gospel of Luke, with help from Pliny the Younger, 85 to 90. So the Gospel of Luke was written by Pliny, partially by Pliny, who was a pedophile. These people are mass murderers. Your Gospels were written by mass murderers and frauds, obviously. In the Gospel story, Piso inserted himself by playing the role not only of Jesus, but of all the Josephs as well. He particularly enjoyed assuming the identity of Joseph. Wishing to create a Jewish hero, a savior in fictional form, he and his father before him felt the identity of a second Joseph secretly, but very aptly fit them. For their name Piso had the same four letters rearranged as the four Hebrew letters Yad, Vov, Samek, and Fe, which in that language spelled the name Joseph. Thus they saw themselves as the new Joseph. That is why so much of the story of Joseph in Egypt is secretly redone and inserted into the gospel story of Jesus. Joseph has 12 brothers. Jesus has 12 disciples. Joseph spices on the camels. With Jesus spices with the Magi. Joseph flees without his cloak from Potiphar's wife. The young disciple flees without his cloak when Jesus is arrested. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver, with inflation, I guess. Brother Judah suggests the sale. Judas sells Jesus. Background was Egypt, bondage, and slaying of the firstborn. Background was flight to Egypt to avoid Herod, slaying of the firstborn male. Miriam is sister of Moses, whose story is sequel to that of Joseph. Miriam is Jesus' mother. The Jesus figure which Piso creates is a composite. He inserts redrawn elements from Joseph in Egypt and other Jews of the Bible, elements from Essenic writings, and characteristics of various pagan gods. Piso plagiarized the Hebrew scriptures. Especially he loved and borrowed freely from the prophet Isaiah, whose 44th chapter was most helpful. Piso's idea to make Jesus a God to whom to bow, worship, and pray came from Isaiah 44, verse 17. And the idea, a little bit of a problem here. There's a line missing or something. So that's what you get when you're reading really old sources, or relatively old sources, pre-computer. And the idea to something in the Gospel of John and in the writings of the Church Fathers. So the Pisos also, he says, also wrote the Church Fathers. So St. Augustine and Origen and Irenaeus and I'm not sure, I can think of any others, but many of the, really all of the early church fathers were also written by them. And they, what they would do is they wrote the Apocrypha, they wrote the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible. He had the Septuagint commissioned and done so that he could read and be fluent in the Hebrew scriptures, so he could use them for his writings of the New Testament. And also he rewrote some of the Old Testament, and he also altered some of the Old Testament in order to predict and prophesy Jesus in the New Testament, because he forced the Jews that were at this Benai something place to take the Septuagint Greek translation of the Old Testament and use that to put it back into Hebrew. So these guys were like, they weren't missing any tricks, and they had the resources and the power to do all this. Apparently, he says they were basically responsible for the assassination of Emperor Domitian, who was the last Flavian emperor in 96 AD. And after that time, Piso was basically the acting emperor. Whoever the person that they put in as emperor was basically just a puppet of Piso. So after 96, they really accelerated their game and wrote all of the epistles, Acts and the epistles, John, and Revelation came much later in like 140, Hebrews also. But in the meantime, they wrote a lot of this other stuff. So they just completely, once this is discovered, if it's true, it's going to just destroy Western civilization. I don't say that happily, because there's nothing else that we're familiar with. I mean, you can go over and say, oh, well, we can fall back on, Buddhism or Hinduism or something like that, but that's not familiar to us, and that could be contaminated just as easily as this is. So, we really have to create something for ourselves that is, he says that he wrote some of the, Nicomachus, who was this Pythagorean mathematician, he says he did that also. So anyway, in addition to creating Jesus in literature, Gospel of John and in the writings of the Church Fathers, the prophecies fit Jesus for the same reason Cinderella's slippers fit her feet. The Jesus story was deliberately written in such a way that it would fulfill the prophecies. In addition to creating Jesus in literature, Piso created for himself another famous literary role, that of a purported Jewish general and then historian, Flavius Josephus. As Josephus, he contended he had bravely led his fellow Jews in the war in defending Galilee against the Roman invaders. However, like Jesus, Josephus came only in literature, that is, in Piso's own writings. Under his fictional name of Flavius Josephus, he also wrote during these approximate years the following: the Jewish War, or Wars of the Jews, 75 to 80 AD, Jewish Antiquities, 90 to 93 AD, his purported autobiography entitled Vita in Latin, which is also fictional, 96 to 103, and Against Appian, 103 to 105. Piso is known publicly in history only under his pen name of Flavius Josephus. So this guy doesn't even register with the historical record, because I think he faked his own death and then assumed the role of Josephus. And I think then he might have faked Josephus's death and took another identity after that. He does not appear as Arius Calpurnius Piso. His true identity is decipherable only by reconstruction. With his father's death at Nero's hands in 65 AD, the Pisos vanish from public Roman history. For the next 73 years, they are busy writing the New Testament and tightening their power over the known world, but they appear only under alias names. They reappear as a family with Piso's grandson Antoninus as emperor in 138 AD, and are thereafter known chiefly as the Antonines, but not as the Pisos. And that also includes like Marcus Aurelius. I think Marcus Aurelius was the grandson of the second Piso, and Diogenes Laertius, I believe they wrote under that name as well. Okay, so this next section is called The Jews Reject the Story. His mother's people rejected his tale, and with good reason. They well knew he had destroyed their temple and city and slaughtered their people because of his senseless hatred, and that he was now the author of the new fiction by which Rome was hoping to control the Judean masses. They also knew that while finishing the Gospel of Matthew and writing his account of the war entitled the Jewish War, he was the Roman general who in 73 destroyed the last 3 Jewish outposts at Machaerus, Herodion, and then Masada. In the semi-fictional story of the war, which he wrote, he gave himself as conqueror of Masada the fictional name Flavius Silva. He knew the details of the siege of Masada intimately because he was the one who conducted it. He wrote that the defenders who committed suicide totaled 960 because, as the explanation in his numerical system, 600 stood for Christ, 300 for the cross, and 60 stood for the name Calpurnius Piso. Then he inserted into the Gospel of Mark, after the year 75, the fallen commander of Masada, Eleazar ben Yair. He makes him Jairus in Mark 5, verse 22. Then he puts him into Luke 8:41 as Lazarus. He was teasing that he, Piso, because his alter ego creation was Jesus, could heal and raise from the dead, whereas Jews had been forced by him to perish at Masada. Because of the destruction in the war, Judea after 70 AD was desolate and underpopulated, with little left to tax. The Herodian aristocracy had gone to Rome permanently to live. The Sadducean priesthood, appointees and in-laws of the Herods, were dead at the revolutionaries' hands, and the remainder scattered to Rome. Even the Essenic visionaries in the desert were dead at Piso's hand. The only surviving Judean leadership were the non-political or fence-straddling Pharisees, who after 70 changed their names to rabbis. The remaining Judeans looked to them for guidance. Their leader, Yohanan ben Zakkai, who we've talked about at length, had obtained Vespasian's permission to establish a school at Yavne. In return, the rabbis now taught pacifism and accommodation to Vespasian's imperial wishes. And the story is exactly the same as it is in Josephus. And so certainly the Pisos had, if Pisos are behind Josephus, then I would say that they are also behind Ben Zakkai. But unlike the Herods before them, they were not fully practical, for they refused to accommodate Piso's wishes as to religion. They refused to instruct their people to accept his story. But they already gave them this other diluted story from the rabbinical Judaism tradition that you just constantly are breaking down scripture, but you don't have a temple, you don't have any rites, you don't have your rituals, your circumcision, you don't have in some cases even your kosher food. So the damage was done pretty strongly to the Jews too, and even though he says they refused to accept his story, but they accepted a different story which was just as powerful. So this guy is a Jew who wrote this, Rushlin, and so he's kind of trying to get something out of his tradition that's not there anymore either. The little man up in the sycamore tree in Luke chapter 19, who becomes a follower of Jesus, Rabbi Gamaliel, is inserted not only as a teacher of Paul in Acts 22:3, but also as the speaker at the Council of Jerusalem, warning that the apostles should be let alone, Acts 5:38. And even Rabbi Akiva would be added to Acts as Agabus in Acts 11:28, and as Siva in Acts 19:14. Okay, we're going to stop right there, and we'll read more about this, I think, although this might be able to be replaced by this other book that I get by Menescot's if it comes tomorrow, and I'll take a look at it and we'll see. So we're going to be sticking with the same subject, but we might hit it from many different angles. So come back if you are interested. Thanks for tuning in today.